Hans-Ulrich Rudel, one of the best-known World War II pilots, mostly flew the famous Junkers Ju-87 Stuka. In early 1943, he was involved in testing of a new anti-tank version of this iconic dive bomber. Two 37mm cannons firing a special Wolfram core round were tested and found suitable for use against ever-increasing number of Soviet tanks. Results were satisfactory, even though the guns carried under the wings and additional armor made the Stuka even slower and less maneuverable than before. But in a wide, dynamic front, where armored units are on the move without much protection from friendly flak or fighters, such an aircraft could have a devastating effect. This new Stuka variant with G designation would become Rudel's standard mount. But it wasn't his definite conversion to a new type. He would still fly the regular dive-bombing D model on some missions. Later in the war, when Stuka units began to convert to Focke-Wulf 190, Rudel would fly this fighter bomber as well, but then go back to Stuka, which he flew even in the final days of the war. In his missions, Rudel's airplane was often damaged enough to result in a forced landing. The exact number is uncertain, but at one point in his memoirs, sometime in the spring of 1944, he mentions being brought down 30 times, all of those by flak. Although he was wounded in some of those cases, he would quickly return to combat, always ignoring his doctor's orders to rest and recover. However, his incredible luck could only keep him safe from a serious injury for so long. In late 1944 and early 1945, Rudel's unit was employed as a sort of a fire brigade, being transferred from one point of the Eastern Front to another to help stop the Soviet assault in the most critical place. On 9 February 1945, German units were defending the line on the river Oder. A call came through from the headquarters, informing Rudel that Soviet units had reportedly bridged the river at Lebus, less than 100 kilometers from the center of Berlin. German ground troops in the area had little hope of stopping them if the bridgehead wasn't immediately eliminated. Rudel was told to reconnoiter the area and confirm the report. The report turned out to be true. Rudel himself was flying as part of the anti-tank flight in a Stuka. He was trying to locate armored vehicles on the western side of the river. He first spotted their tracks, and eventually he saw some 12 to 15 tanks north of the Lebus village. He then heard the noise of flak hitting his aircraft. Rudel estimated between 6 and 8 batteries being placed around the river crossing. The flak crews were apparently experienced. They fired without tracers and stopped firing as soon as the Stukas climbed, so they couldn't easily be spotted and attacked. There were no hills or buildings to hide behind. Attacking targets under such risky conditions would normally not be attempted, but Soviets were now on German soil, and Rudel decided to risk. He went in alone, knowing that less experienced pilots in his flight had little chance of success. Among the tanks Rudel saw, several were Stalin heavy tanks, and the rest were T-34s. He claimed no less than 4 of them before running out of ammo. He then returned to base and took off again for 2 more sorties. He reported to his superiors that he was attempting such risky tactics only because the Soviets were so close to Berlin. Many Germans, including Rudel, still believed that stopping this threat from the east was somehow possible. In both his second and third sortie, Rudel had to return to base because his aircraft was damaged. Rudel was now flying his 4th sortie against the Soviet tanks west of Oder. He had claimed 12 tanks altogether, however one Stalin tank was smoking but refused to catch fire. Rudel had made several passes at this tank, first climbing to 700 meters and then diving on it and weaving violently until the last moment. His failure to eliminate the Stalin tank was making him furious and less composed than usually. Even when he realized his left gun was jammed and his right gun only had 1 round left, he still wasn't giving up. He felt like 2 persons inside him were arguing and giving pros and cons for attacking or going home to reload his guns. The image of this particular Soviet tank rolling through Germany was decisive in the end. Rudel would make 1 more pass. He repeated the same procedure of weaving and firing at the last moment. The Stalin tank finally went up in flames. But as Rudel was pulling away, he heard a hit to his engine, and then something like hot iron searing through his leg. The pain made him black out for a moment, but then he regained consciousness. He heard his rear gunner Gademan telling him that the aircraft had been hit and that they needed to force land. Rudel turned left, thinking this would put him on a westerly heading. He could barely see anything, and he relied on his gunner's instructions. Gademan had to yell at Rudel a few times to keep him awake and to avoid hitting the ground. Although the terrain was difficult and the airplane still on fire, Rudel somehow landed and immediately sank into unconsciousness. Next thing he remembered was waking up in a hospital and the surgeon confirming that his leg had been amputated. But not even this handicap would stop Rudel from flying. On Easter Eve, 31st of March 1945, he ordered a Stuka brought to Berlin so he could fly it back to his unit and continue flying combat missions. He first flew without any artificial limb, using only his left foot to work the rudder. Later, he used an improvised device prepared by his mechanics. Rudel flew until the last day of the war, and he famously surrendered to the Americans, deliberately crashing his Stuka on landing. Let me point out that description of these events comes from Rudel's autobiography. Autobiographies are not necessarily 100% reliable and accurate as historical sources, and should be taken with some reservation. Of course, believing that they are entirely made up would be a much bigger mistake. Press the like button if you liked the video. Join our Patreon supporters or donate on PayPal to ensure future content, and keep watching Showtime 112.